Hello everyone, my name is Ethan Michael, and I've recently been introduced to the philosophical idea of the sublime. Taking words from a lecturer of mine, the modern day use of the word sublime has watered down its original meaning. These days, sublime is a word that can be just put in place of something like very good, with an example used by my lecturer of a football commentator calling a free kick sublime. However, the original meaning of the word sublime, coming from the Latin word sublimis, is an idea that something can both be seen as beautiful and terrifying. It can both attract and reject you simultaneously. An example I've been using recently to explain to people is to imagine yourself at the base of Mount Everest. At first you're looking up at it and it's undeniably one of Mother Nature's most beautiful features. However, it also needs to be addressed that when at the base looking up, you are gazing upon 29,000 feet of stone, of rock wall, nearly 8,000 meters of a place where hundreds and genuinely hundreds of bodies lay deceased. That's a very unnerving thought. In this video, I would like to combine my love for film and my newfound interest in the concept of the sublime and talk about films that evoke the sublime feeling in their audiences. And today's topic of discussion is 2021's Dune. But before we head into this analysis of Dune, I would like to expand upon the concept of the sublime and mention certain works and theorists that have inspired my own writings on this topic.
Sublime!
So I would like to begin by saying I am in no way an expert on the sublime. I simply have a liking for the concept. I've previously written about monumentalism within film, which is all about the capturing of massive objects and how that makes the audience feel, and that is very much interlinked with the idea of the sublime. In fact, that's how I came across the idea of the sublime, as my lecturer said when critiquing my essay about monumentalism within film. Big word that, by the way. He said that I should have talked about the sublime. So I'm just a former film student and a now art philosophy student who wants to talk about both of those things. So for some context, I've read so far 3 books on the sublime, those being The Sublime Now by Luke White and Claire Pajkowska. I'll put that up on the screen for you. We then have The Sublime by Philip Shaw, which is basically like a complete overview of the history of the sublime. So this is the first one I read. It's a really good one if you're looking at getting into it at all. And then finally we have what's probably the most important work on the sublime. We have The Critique of Judgment by Immanuel Kant. I haven't fully finished this yet, but the whole book itself is not just about the sublime, but there is a 100-page chapter called The Analytic of the Sublime, and that is what I'm reading through at the moment. And I've watched multiple videos and read articles and will no doubt read more books on the sublime, but for now, those are the texts which I get most of my knowledge from. And the philosophers I will be focusing on today are that of Longinus, Edmund Burke, and Immanuel Kant. Or Kant, I don't really know. He's German, so just say it with some anger, I guess. The first notable piece of writing on the sublime was penned by Greek philosopher Cassius Longinus. The title, translated into English, is On the Sublime, with the original Greek name being Perihypsu, and the Latin title being Da Sublimitate. Sublimitate, I've mispronounced both the Greek and Latin names of that. I'm sure I have. In truth, it appears that the text as a whole is more concerned with speech, rhetoric, and styles of writing, but the styles of writing point does lead us somewhere, as Longinus, and this is paraphrasing, but he tells us that a sublime style of writing is one that elevates itself above the ordinary. So the first description we see of the sublime is something that is above the normal. And it is important to note that Longinus very much associated the sublime with the divine, using words like divinity and deity rather frequently, which makes sense because what is a godlike figure if not elevated above the ordinary? Longinus states, "Nature has implanted in our souls an unconquerable passion for all that is great and for all that is more divine than ourselves." Speaking of nature within the sublime, Anglo-Irish philosopher Edmund Burke was of the belief that nature was the most sublime object, able of generating the strongest possible emotions in its beholders. And whilst Burke did ponder the link between the sublime and the mind of the beholder, it was German writer Immanuel Kant who set out fully to explore what happens to the mind when its borders of reason finds its limit. Kant declared that the sublime was not solely an effect caused by the sheer power of nature, but a feeling/experience of subjectivity that occurs within the mind. Burke, however, did not believe that the sublime was nothing but a side effect of experiencing nature's destructive force. He did also argue that words held power. A quote from Philip Shaw reads, "To raise the idea of the sublime such that the distinction between the sublime object and its description no longer applies, it is language, in other words, that brings about the transformation of the world, enabling us to hymn the vastness of the cathedral or the depths of the ravine." And what that means is, and in a less wanky way, what that says is certain words have the power to elevate. And whilst the idea of words specifically holding power over the sublime may not be all that important when analysing the sublime within film, it is key that we look at this quote and this ideology in general as a thought on language as a whole. Films speak to the audience through visual language, whether this be shot composition, set design, etc., anything visual. In an article on the Sublime, Dwight Goodyear shows us 3 separate shots of the pyramids of Giza to explain the idea of distance in regards to the Sublime. And these 3 shots contain one shot of the pyramids very far away, one very up close, and the other just in between, where the whole shot captures the entire pyramid, but it's very much they are on the bottom and top of the pyramid is on the edge of the screen. The article suggests that the final image would be the ideal view of the pyramids in order to experience sublimity, explaining that the time the eye would take to comprehend the lower tiers of the structure would be partly forgotten by the imagination by the time the eye has reached the apex of the pyramid, meaning that the full comprehension of the tower would never reach completion within the mind, leading to a lack of full understanding, which is very important, leading to a sublime experience. Any sublime experience is due to the failings of wholeness in understanding. If you fully understand something, you will not experience the sublime because of it. This practice of theory displays the importance of how an object is shot in a film in accordance with how likely this object is to exhibit the sublime. Kant theorized the idea of how it is possible to experience the sublime from a safe distance. German poet Friedrich Schiller disagreed with this sentiment, believing that feeling endangered was an integral piece to experiencing the sublime. And this is quite important for discussion on the sublime within film, because the audience are unable to genuinely feel endangered when watching a film. Humans, they can feel every emotion whilst watching film. They can even feel endangered to some extent. However, the unconscious mind is aware that a certain level of endangerment is not possible through watching a film, and therefore the human mind is unable to experience true sublimity through film. In a simple example, watching a video of somebody at the bottom of Everest is going to give you a different feeling than actually being at the bottom of Everest looking up. The sublime within film is all about experiencing these things vicariously through the characters we see on screen. This is where it is key to state that we are analysing the representation of the sublime experience through film. All human experience takes place through representation, and that all representation is some kind of system which has the effect of creating meaning. This video is not attempting to state that the audience can fully experience the sublime via a film. The only semblance of the sublime the audience could experience would be vicariously through a character in the film. By attempting to imagine themselves in a certain situation, the human viewer could reach some level of endangerment and wonder, but not enough to experience true sublimity. This video will refer to the audience as experiencing the sublime when analysing our film. However, it is more akin to the audience acknowledging the possibility of a sublime feeling rather than genuinely feeling endangered by the scenes that will be discussed. Circling back to film language and the importance of staging an object correctly to convey the sublime, once again the audience is living vicariously through our film characters, meaning that they are less likely to feel any sort of sublime feeling or experience if the film stages our character far from the object that could possibly be the source of sublimity. Here it is important to remember the pyramid example. If a character on screen is looking at a massive object from a far enough distance that they can view it in its entirety with ease, this means the character will not feel any semblance of sublimity, therefore the audience will certainly not either. Immanuel Kant's biggest contribution to the concept of the sublime are his subgenres. He theorizes that there are two types of sublime, the mathematical and the dynamic. The mathematical sublime preludes to the idea of unfathomably large numbers and the concept of infinity. Try and think of something with no end. You can't. It is beyond the human minds to fathom something of that scale. And it's arguable that the word scale can't even be implied upon something that is infinite. And that idea of something so large that it reaches past words like size and scale, that is terrifying and incomprehensible to the human mind. And then the dynamic sublime is about the superiority of nature and its sheer power that it has over us humans. So the dynamic sublime is very much in cohesion with Edmund Burke and his thoughts on nature's power, evoking both tremendous levels of adoration and fear in the human mind. So to summarize, the sublime in the context of this video is something that takes possession of our attention and all of our faculties and absorbs them in astonishment. It is not caused by any one thing. I personally believe it is a subconscious emotion the mind exhibits when it fails to comprehend something. Whenever the power of an object or an event is such that words fail and points of comparison disappear, then we resort to the feeling of the sublime. The sublime is above beauty, as beauty only deals in feelings of the positive nature and only speaks in pleasantries. The sublime takes these agreeable feelings and contributes a new angle of shock, of awe, of terror, of repulsion. The sublime contains everything that beauty involves, but it evokes the opposite feelings that beauty does, all while simultaneously still summoning those pleasant ideas that beauty instills. The sublime places polar opposites in disgust and attraction as close to each other as possible, to the point where you cannot tear the two feelings from each other's grasp. The sublime transcends humanity, and in each video of this series it'll be my point to discover and explore just how said film transcends humanity. For a film like Dune, where the civilizations we see have for the most part overcome nature's power as they conquer galaxies and build ships that break physics and are big enough to affect ecosystems, the dynamic sublime and the idea of experiencing sublimity through nature will be of less use and will make way for the likes of technological and post-human sublime. The world of Dune is one that has reached a state of post-humanity, as whilst the characters of this world still refer to themselves as the human race, they have vastly transcended to a different level of being than that of our current day humanity. Dune's humanity and our modern day humanity are incredibly detached from one another just as concepts. Taking place 20,000 years in the future, the abilities that the humans of Dune possess, they seem otherworldly, from the Bene Gesserit and their voice of manipulation to the human computers known as the Mentat. Even the spaceship pilots of this universe take the spice drug in order to navigate the cosmos. From a first thought, these powers seem as unlikely, fantastical, unrealistic as the likes of Spider-Man and the Hulk and other superheroes. However, when met with the idea that showing a human from 1,000 years ago something just like an iPhone would seem like witchcraft to them, and then the question begins to arise, could we end up like the humanity shown in Dune? We only need to go back to 2007 to see the invention of the iPhone. The first successful plane flight only happened 66 years before we landed on the moon. So 20,000 years of human evolution could lead to all manner of currently unfathomable things. This is where we could see an almost like psychological sublime take effect, as the thought of humanity one day becoming so detached from what our current idea of humanity is astonishing from like a technological progression perspective. But yet the viewpoint of life quality and the human experience existing in the world of Dune, it just seems so dangerous and terrifying. The technological Sublime seeps through Dune's entire ethos, with all aspects of its world design being that of a civilization or civilizations that are clearly working on a higher scale of engineering and science than humanity currently is. We quickly see that this world has become one where the power of divine nature has been transferred to the power of human technology. The architecture, be that of the buildings or vehicles of Dune, quickly enters the world of the weird and the eerie due to our unfamiliarity with such design. These spaceships we see are impossibly large, which, along with the movements of these ships, causes the human mind to struggle with comprehension. The largest of the vehicles we see in this film, they move as if they do not follow the laws of physics, or at least the laws of physics current day humanity abides by. No plumes of smoke billow from their underbellies as they generate enough force to leave the ground. They instead silently float upwards into the sky, leaving no mark on the ground despite their massive scale. The combination of their odd design and somewhat magical methods of traversal creates an incredibly uneasy feeling in the viewer. Philip Shaw's words, "The terror of the Sublime is brought about through its relation with the real," states that the Sublime and reality, more specifically the mind's concept of reality, are inherently linked. We are aware that vehicles can't move how some vehicles do in Dune. However, remembering that this world is 20,000 years ahead of us, the mind tries to reason with itself, thinking that this may be a possibility in the future of humanity. But due to modern technology's inability to recreate the ships we see on screen, these vehicles at this moment in time in 2023, they still seem otherworldly. The mind cannot connect the dots on how they function while still being so massive in size. The ships we see are just one instance of technology in Dune being incomprehensible to the current day human mind, therefore evoking a constant sense of technological sublimity throughout the film's runtime. Now, one of the most striking images within the entire runtime of Dune is seen near the beginning, and it sets the scale for the rest of the film, showing us the level of size and design and engineering that this world deals in. This shot does a fantastic job of showcasing the scale of this universe, with three main elements making up this composition: the object of the shot, the ship, the crowd of hundreds of humans standing below the ship, and the natural objects in the shot, the mountains, the forest, the hills, etc. These three separate parts of the shot all come together to create scale in a very tangible and believable way, as we humans can imagine vividly the size of objects such as trees, mountains, hills, and of course the human body itself. So when we all see these objects, even the hills, just pale in comparison to the ship, it really shows scale in a brilliant and informative way. And this shot, even out of context, could still evoke a sublimity through the sheer power and scale on show. However, it's where we arrive to the discovery that narrative and story context actually play a very important role when representing the Sublime in film. It is not solely about size and scale. When given the context of the story, the image's powerful effect begin to realise. Whilst narrative structure predates and outspans its specifically cinematic form, there is no doubt that the cinematic plotting of stories has particular power and significance. This moment in the story is when the audience are first introduced to the name Shaddam IV, who is said to be the Emperor of the known universe. This massive ship belongs to him, and it is no coincidence that the first time the audience see a ship of this magnitude, it is to one that belongs to the ruler of this story's universe. Knowing that this ship belongs to the most powerful being in the Dune universe utilizes the natural human connection between size and power to create a sublime effect. One of the most famous artworks on the Sublime is Joseph Wright's Vesuvius in eruption with a view over the islands in the Bay of Naples. I mean, fucking hell, mate, can I get some more details, please? I'm not really sure what this painting's about. This painting depicts the destructive power of a volcano and compares it to the insignificance of humanity via the small group of people in the foreground. And when placing this painting and the previously mentioned shot in Dune side by side, it would not be surprising at all if director Denis Villeneuve and cinematographer Greg Fraser were directly influenced by this painting. I have not found anything to back this idea up. I'm not claiming that they were inspired by this painting. It would just not shock me at all if that were true. And let me explain how and why the similarities of the two pieces of work are shockingly close. As previously mentioned, the shot from Dune contains three main elements: the source of the sublime, the ship, the depiction of human insignificance, the crowd, and the natural elements for comparison, the mountains, hills, trees, etc. Vesuvius in Eruption also contains these three main elements to create an image that strikes the viewer and evokes that sublime feeling. Those three elements being the sublime source as the erupting volcano, the small group of people being the depiction of human insignificance, and the blue moonlit lake being the natural element for comparison. It is no coincidence that despite being over 200 years apart, both these sublime evoking images are strikingly similar in their composition and element inclusion. This comparison tells us that the sublime, whilst an ever-evolving topic in the world of art and philosophy and aesthetics, still adheres to certain concepts and ideas, and humanity does and will always chase the sublime feeling. Take yourself to any time where art exists and you'll find somebody trying to depict the undepictable, trying to represent the unrepresentable, trying to fathom the unfathomable. When I was first writing the essay that this video was based on, I could not believe the gold I had struck when I noticed the similarities between the two pictures, and I think it's one of the best points I've written on the topic of sublime through art, and I think it really does convey the points I'm trying to make. And the final point that I'd like to make, it involves divinity, the divinity that the sublime originally incurred with the works of Longinus, as I'd like to talk about the Bene Gesserit. The evolution of humanity shown in Dune could be used to argue that the humans of Dune are actually closer to gods, to divine beings than actual humans, and no group exudes this feeling more than the Bene Gesserit. And in truth, this isn't a mind-blowing point to be making. They are a religious cult who are waiting for a saviour to be born. The first time you see them, they wear these robes and dresses that can only be described as rented from the Vatican. There are plenty of writings that compare the Bene Gesserit establishment to like the Catholic Church. And there's only really a few things I want to mention, but I just feel like with the religious undertones, this needed to be talked about in a video about sublime representation in Dune. Our time with the Bene Gesserit is short, but it's an impactful moment nonetheless. In these very few short scenes, we are introduced to the religious group that speak of a saviour, and then we see our first true use of the voice with character Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, bringing Paul to his knees without lifting a finger. What is it with this insane dystopian future still having characters called Paul and Helen? You've got the names Gaius and Mohiam, and then in between those two names you stuck Helen in there. Anyway, I think the voice as a concept in Dune could be read as like a metaphor for the power religion has over humanity. And that's all religion, it's not just Christianity, even though the Bene Gesserit, they seem to be mostly taking from like that and like the Catholic Church and the Vatican and all that, like the aesthetics of those things, but it's about just religion as a concept. Religion and godlike figures have so much power over people without having really to do anything apart from having a book from hundreds of thousands of years ago. The world has evolved so much since the times the Bible and the Holy Scriptures speak on, and yet to this day there are some people who follow the teachings of these ancient books like word for word, and a lot of it has to do with like the indoctrination and instilling of fear into children. A child's first authority figure is the parent. Whatever they say goes, whatever they believe, the child should believe. So what is a child going to think when their authority figure has their own authority figure in the shape of a god or a prophet, holy figure, whatever you want to call them? And then what do you expect the child to feel aside from fear in God when they read the Bible? I'm reading a book right now, it's called The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, and there's a section in this book where he goes through some of the stories the Bible tells, and there is just an abundance of like mindless murder and sacrifice. A lot of it comes in the way of like women and children, and there just seems to be this theme of like God will smite you down if you are not his perfect child, unless you're like a woman. In that case, who gives a fuck what you feel? Or if you're a kid, who cares? Because I'm talking to this bloke, your dad, he's going to sacrifice you. There's a lot of that going on in the Bible. And what is a vulnerable and easily influenced child going to do when his dad tells him these same things, these same teachings. All of that damage and influence has been done, and no one of like religious power or anything has lifted a finger. These vulnerable little humans have just read a book, which just for the time sounded normal, but right now the zeitgeist of the world, the spirit of the world, has changed so much since whenever like these holy scriptures were written. Attitudes towards things like people of different races and just women in general and other genders were just so different to now than they were back then. And all of that very serious stuff to say, I think the voice power in Dune channels that level of influence and power. Before moving on, I would like to say that might have sounded like a lot of just like, I've got this crazy anti-religion agenda, and that is exacerbated when I say I was reading a book called The God Delusion, but I don't share the same views that this book does, because this guy, Richard Dawkins, oh my god, there's 400 pages, bro, this man hates religion. He yaps like crazy about how horrible it is, and I understand the points he's making. I don't agree with all of them fully, but I find the topic of God and religion, clearly I find all of it very interesting, and I think my girlfriend got me the book at a charity shop for like £4. So who am I to not read it? I was just using the whole story as an example of influence and power that religion has over humanity, and relating that to my silly film that has big worms. And the final thing I just needed to point out, because I thought it was such a cool comparison that I made in my head, when the Bene Gesserit ship takes off, don't all of those lights kind of look like a biblically accurate angel? And I just thought that was really cool, but also a bit scary. Is there a word for that? Dune transcends our current idea of humanity via its own depiction of how humanity and how different it could look in 20,000 years worth of evolution. It takes nature, which is arguably the most sublime object, and instead uses it for points of comparison, in order to show the level of technological prowess that the world of Dune is working on. The people of Dune can do quantum maths in seconds. They can float and extend in length. They can force people's bodies to follow their command with just their voice. Their ships do not follow the modern day understanding of physics and its laws. And yet these vastly different beings are all still tarred with the same brush, that of humanity. Hello everyone, I'd like to be a bit more laid back for a section at the end of most videos after I speak like I'm giving a uni lecture for like 20-25 minutes. So here I am, not speaking like a wanker. I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope it was interesting, but I also hope that I conveyed the concepts and ideas well enough that it didn't just sound like I was yapping the entire time with just no cohesion at all. I hope people who didn't really know about the Sublime before this, so at least to an extent, understand. If you enjoyed it or found it interesting or not is different, but if you understood the ideas because I conveyed them well, then I'm happy. The next edition of Sublime Cinema, it's going to be on Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, because I can't stop fucking talking about that film. I originally wrote an essay comparing the two films, but I thought I really wanted to just separate them into two different videos, because I love both these films and I think they both deserve their own attention. Then I'm going to tackle some films like 2014's Godzilla, Jordan Peele's Nope, there's a few others for sure. I might talk about Oppenheimer, but there's a different video topic that I want to make about Oppenheimer, so I'm not too sure. But I'm also going to make other videos about other topics other than the Sublime, not so I don't just become like a Sublime cinema channel, because I just like making these, you know, documentary video essay type things. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will see you in the next one. I love you. I'm leaving you. Goodbye.